Our presenter now is here for the third of four sessions. You have heard his curriculum vitae. So suffice it to say, Wendell Karsen has had a long, illustrious, distinguished career as pastor, missionary, theologian, educator, and author. So please join me in welcoming Wendell Karsen.
Thank you very much. Again, it's a privilege to be here amongst you. And one of my main reasons for coming to do these lectures was to eat those Canadian maple leaf cookies that you served the first week. They weren't there last week. They're not there this week. I hope they'll be here next week. Okay. Today, of course, we are going to visit China, and it's not as a lot of, if it were all history, you'd be here for 10 hours, but this is more contemporary presentation. So the first question we ask, what are Xi Jinping's goals? The first one would be that he wants to stay in power. He's the new emperor of China. China has always had, as you know, centralized government, the emperor at the top and then all the way down. And the party so far has produced three emperors, at least, Mao Zedong, and then Deng Xiaoping, and now Xi Jinping. He's been in power since 2012, now 71 years old, the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, and Chairman of the Central Military Commission, President of the PRC, Chairman of the National Security Commission, paramount leader, already the longest one since Mao Zedong. And then Deng Xiaoping had been in power for 11 years. He's a busy man. He is the son of a Chinese communist veteran, Xi Zhongxun. Xi was exiled to rural Ranchun County as a teenager following his father's purge during the Cultural Revolution. He lived in the Yaodong in the village of Langjihai, where he joined the CCP and worked as the local party secretary. After studying chemical engineer at Tsinghua University as a worker, peasant, soldier student, Xi rose through the ranks politically in China's coastal provinces. And that's what he looked like as a young man, pretty nice looking. Obviously gifted, obviously committed to, even though his father had been persecuted, to the party. In 2007, Xi became a member of the Politburo Standing Committee of the CCP and served as first secretary of the Central Secretariat. In 2008, he was designated as President Hu Jintao's successor and was appointed vice president of the People's Republic of China and vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, which was a very important post. In 2012, he became president of the PRC. In 2016, he officially received the title of paramount leader from the CCP. In 2018, he abolished presidential term limits, got another 5-year term, and in 2023, yet another 5-year term. This continues the CCP tradition of rule of men rather than by law. The second goal is to turn back the political clock 50 years and restore the Communist Party's absolute grip on power. Xi's often been described as a dictator or an authoritarian leader by political and academic observers, citing what? An increase of censorship and mass surveillance, a deterioration in human rights, including the internment of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang province, the development of a cult of personality, the elimination of rivals through an anti-corruption campaign, and the removal, as we said, of term limits for the presidency during his tenure. And here we see the National People's Congress amending the Constitution to give him unlimited terms as the paramount leader. Like Mao, Xi's political thoughts have been incorporated into the party and national constitution and published in a new little white book, is what I call it, Xi Jinping thought. On 11 November 2021, the CCP declared Xi's ideology the, quote, essence of Chinese culture, unquote. This became the third fundamental resolution of the Chinese Communist Party since its inception. The first resolution was adopted in 1945 to increase and ratify the power of Mao Zedong, and the second was adopted under Deng Xiaoping. The decision to issue one under Xi symbolically raises him to the same level of prestige as Mao and Deng. And here's what the little white book looks like. Mao's, of course, was the little red book. His third goal is to restore China as the great power, both politically and economically. Now, if you know anything about the history of China, you know about the Central Kingdom. Zhonghua, the name in Chinese of China, means Central Kingdom. And the viewpoint has always been that that's the center of the earth. The emperor is the center of the kingdom. And all the rest of the earth are barbarians and need to come and bow down to the emperor. So this is a long rooted tradition in China. And it's a little bit hard for us in our free-for-all kind of form of society and government to envision how deeply ingrained this is in the Chinese people. So in 1842 to 1949, China experienced a century of humiliation, which is kind of similar to Putin's grievances over the loss of the USSR empire. This was the era during which you had the two opium wars and the humiliation of China by foreign powers, France, Britain, Russia, Japan. The US got in on it, not militarily, but other ways. And they thought the whole of China was going to be carved up between the colonial powers. So there's a deep vein in Chinese people's thinking about that 100 years and how the whole nation was humiliated. And so now we're going to become #1 in the world. So there's a military buildup to back Xi's aspirations to catch up and surpass the USA. And there's has been an economic buildup to increase China's wealth, acquisition of technology, clout and influence in the world, and surpass the USA. For example, the Belt and Road Initiative towards Europe and Africa. The development of a blue water navy to break out of the first island box. If you look at a map, you see that around the East China Sea, the South China Sea, there is Japan, there are islands, of course, and Taiwan, and then down through Indonesia, which is kind of the first island chain. And China's Navy has never been able to go out and be a blue water Navy beyond that. So this is now changing. They can break out of that box. 6, to claim hegemony over South China Sea and East China Sea, militarize atolls to push the USA out of first island chain, change and control access to Taiwan, to oil and so on, by putting a squeeze on the straits between Taiwan and China. And then détente with Russia to confront the USA and Europe with the nightmare of a possible 3-front war. So the first front would be in Europe with Russia. The second front would be in the Middle East with Iran. And the third front would be in the Far East with a war to defend Taiwan. So if you're a US military planner, this is not a very comforting thought every night. His fourth goal is to conquer Taiwan, and he stated that very, very clearly. We did 2 weeks ago, we covered that whole waterfront, so you'll remember what we said then. Fifth goal is to quash democracy and human rights in Hong Kong. We talked about that last week, and that has succeeded. The agreement under Deng Xiaoping, as we said, was for one country, two systems for 50 years. Hong Kong would be semi-autonomous. And now in 25 years' time, it is one country, one system, with Hong Kong being integrated into China and under very tight security. Actually, they just passed another thing last week threatening anybody who's running for office in Taiwan, Hong Kong, or in the legislature with fines or even imprisonment if they so much as criticize not only the Chinese government, but the Hong Kong government. So nobody can say anything untoward. His sixth goal is to sinicize, read communize religion, and particularly the Christian religion. Over the previous 6 years, thousands of crosses have been forcibly removed from church buildings. Hundreds of those buildings have been demolished under the guise of enforcing illegal building ordinances, and an estimated 10,000 church buildings have been closed. Here you see one of the huge churches being blown up. I actually visited this church once, and a number of others that have been demolished. Churches and institutions that were previously tolerated are being pressured to register, meaning to come under the control of the National Religious Affairs Administration, or NRAA, or be shut down, particularly in urban areas. And my terms for these churches are unregistered churches and registered churches. Those are the two categories. Some people use the term underground churches for the unregistered churches. That's a political term. And I think it only invites trouble if you refer to them as underground churches. They're unregistered, and they do not want to register because they do not want what happens in terms of the supervision of the registered churches by the government. I've had extensive contacts with both registered church leaders and unregistered church leaders. And up until Xi Jinping, things were fine. The church was expanding. I think, as I said before, fastest growing church in the world. And now under Xi, all this has changed. We'll see how. The National Religious Affairs Administration was established to exercise control over religious appointments, to exercise control over the selection of clergy, to exercise control over the interpretation of religious doctrine, to ensure that registered religious organizations do not support unregistered groups, which even K.H. Ding, the Protestant leader of the church in China for 60 years, had openly advocated for under Deng Xiaoping, so that to not harass unregistered churches. But now they're being harassed. To ensure that the churches carry out the policy priorities of the Chinese Communist Party. This is Chen Rufeng. He's the head of the NRAA at this time. Third thing is a 6th chapter draconian revision of regulations on religious affairs, which was drafted and implemented in 2018. An even more restrictive update was implemented on February 1, 2020. Among many other things, children under 18 are again prohibited from attending services, youth camps, and church schools. They're instead pressured into joining CCP-affiliated youth groups where they must pledge a commitment to atheism. So here's a sign actually outside of a church, and you can see no young people allowed. And when under Deng Xiaoping and the whole opening of China to the West and the canceling of all of Mao's attempts to eliminate religion from China, I visited Sunday schools, youth camps, a lot of things that were going. And now that's all gone again. Xi's portrait and the national flag are required to be placed at the sanctuary of all churches. And CCP propaganda billboards are to be displayed near church entrances with slogans like "Love the party," "Love the state," love the religion. Note that the party comes first, the state second, and religion third. All religious personnel are required to support the CCP and to propagate its policies. According to Article 17, religious organizations must spread the principles and policies of Chinese Communist Party, as well as national laws, regulations, and rules to religious personnel and religious citizens. Educate religious personnel and religious citizens to support the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, support the socialist system, and adhere to and follow the path of socialism with Chinese characteristics. Read capitalism with Chinese characteristics. This is a photograph of the Assembly of the China Christian Council, National Assembly, where these were reviewed. The law also stipulates that, quote, without the approval of the NRAA of the People's Government or registration with the Civil Affairs Department of the People's Government, no activities can be carried out in the name of religious groups, unquote. In 2019, the Communist Party reiterated its ban on its 90 million members belonging to religious congregations, something that had been regularly ignored in practice. The new rules ramped up the process of the Sinicization of religion, effectively a project to embed the state into religion. One of the goals of government work plan for promoting Chinese Christianity between 2018 and 22 was thought reform. For example, the plan called for a retranslation and annotation of the Bible to find commonalities with socialism and to establish a correct understanding of the text. In March 2023, measures on the administration of Internet religious information services was promulgated. Article 3 states, those engaged in Internet religious information services shall abide by the Constitution, laws, regulations, and rules, practice the core socialist values, adhere to the nation's principle of religious independence and self-government, persist in the nation's orientation toward the Sinicization of religion, actively bring about the adaptation of religion to socialist society, and preserve religious tranquility and acquiescence, social harmony, and ethnic concordance. In December 2023, under the party's instruction, the National China Christian Council passed a new 5-year plan to, quote, continue to promote the Sinicization of Christianity and run Chinese churches well in accordance with socialist society. And this was the photograph of the meeting where that was passed. In February 2025, that's this year, the CCC and the China Christian Council and the 3 self-patriotic movement boards of directors endorsed 4 key priorities. K.H. Ding, by the way, advocated for the end of the 3 self-patriotic movement years ago, and said that it was outdated, wasn't needed anymore, and the China Christian Council should just be the leading force for the church in China. But it's still there, and the 4 priorities are advancing the Sinicization of Christianity, strengthening religious governance, fostering talent development, and expanding foreign exchanges. And this is a meeting of that China Christian Council leadership and 3 self-patriotic movement. So they still each have their separate boards. And in May 2021, China's State Administration for Religious Affairs Measures, check this is the name of a bill that was passed. They love long names. State Administration for Religious Affairs Measures for the Administration of Religious Clerical Personnel came into effect. The new measure expanded an invasive and comprehensive system of control and surveillance on clergy. Article 3 of the measures requires clergy, among other demands, to support the Chinese Communist Party's rule, the Chinese socialist political system, and the CCP's Sinicization of religious policy. And here you see the ordination of a clergy person, but that has to be confirmed by the government's NRAE. In June 2022, the financial management measures for places of religious activities came into effect. They directly characterize unregistered churches as illegal, with illegal personnel, illegal gatherings, and illegal property donations. Now that's very important, because just yesterday I read of another 4 people in the Chinese unregistered church being arrested and sentenced to, I think, 8 years in prison for illegally collecting funds, meaning they took up an offering in the church. So you can use this as a, embezzling funds and arrest people. When such churches are shut down, their personnel are punished, arrested, and sentenced, and their church property is basically confiscated. In April 2023, new rules that took effect in July 2024, last year, were issued by the Ministry of State Security that gave China's state security police sweeping powers to search electronic devices, including smartphones and laptops, as part of a nationwide campaign to assure a national security, a broad term often used by the government to include detailed economic data and political dissent. Without a warrant, police can now investigate purely to determine basic information about the suspect, whether an illegal or criminal act has taken place or not. This has dire implications for the non-registered church leaders, as you can imagine. In August 2023, the Chinese government issued the administrative measures for religious activity venues. These measures required religious venues to support the leadership of the CCP, support the socialist system, and thoroughly implement Xi Jinping's new era of socialism with Chinese characteristics. The new rules prohibit organizations and individuals from using religious venues to, in their view, endanger national security or to disrupt social order, public interest, or citizens' legal rights, among other activities. All these measures always are in general terms. How do you interpret that specifically? That's the problem many times. And so they can interpret it exactly the way they want. So here's a choir in a church that we attended. In effect, the new edict confirms that religious activity venues must actively broadcast CCC propaganda or face liquidation. There are also stricter provisions for including propaganda content in sermons and establishing study groups of CCP documents in all places of worship. And there again, how do you interpret what a pastor says in the sermon? The law also specifies that it is prohibited to build large open-air religious statues outside of temples and churches, a prohibition that also applies to private citizens or donors. This is a huge statue of John Adi, the founder of the Hope Wilhelmina Hospital in the Amoy Mission of the Reformed Church. I've been there, had my picture taken next to it. And this was erected with this great support of the local administration of the city in 2001. So does that mean they're going to demolish this? I don't know. And there's also like Matteo Ricci, the first Jesuit missionary to China, in the who got to Beijing in 1610 and had great influence there. And there's a big statue of him in front of the South Cathedral in Beijing. I wonder if they're going to tear that down. On January 1, 2024, that's last year, China's new patriotic education law came into effect. further tightening the screws on classrooms in which part of the appeal was supposed to be Western style teaching. And a lot of international schools have been closed in China. Because this isn't only a thing to shut out Christianity, it's a thing to say the West is a threat, and anything to do with the West and English and Western thinking is not welcome in Chinese schools. The law requires that all levels and types of schools shall have patriotic education permeate the entire course of school education. This they just promulgated for Hong Kong as well, which is a very scary thing. Because the church runs the vast majority, churches run vast majority of the schools in Hong Kong. So for them to have the patriotic education, which means, of course, the promotion of the CCP in all of their curriculum, is a very big difficulty. So the law requires that all levels and types of schools shall have patriotic education permeate the entire course of school education, doing a good job of ideology and political theory courses, and having patriotic education integrated into all subjects. So that means into religious education as well in schools, in the Hong Kong schools. This is the main tool the government will use to try and quash religion, and particularly Christianity, in any type of school. Due to all of this, an increasing number of Chinese Christian families began opting to send their children to local Christian schools. However, beginning in 2020, those schools were declared to be illegal, and most were shut down. Even after school tutorial programs were banned. Upon the closure of their schools, these students were not able to fully rejoin the official system, because if they had not begun their education in the public education system, they could not get an official student ID and would not be able to take the middle school graduation exam or later the college entrance exam, because they would not have the student ID. So this is really putting a very unfair burden on anybody that had been to a Christian school before. Some parents then decided to homeschool, but that was also declared to be illegal, and Christian homeschool education resources were stifled. And it was dangerous to do so, because if your little kid was being homeschooled and played in the neighborhood, and some other little kid said, "And where are you going to school?" "My mom's teaching me." You were in big trouble. Some then resorted to sending their children to Christian international schools like the one in Bangkok, Thailand. And this is a picture of a group of what I would call Chinese exiles. And there are two exiles in there you might recognize in the back and the middle. The second subject is the recent developments that have impacted China. In 2004, the formation of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or the Quad, by USA, Japan, India, and Australia for tsunami relief. You remember the huge tsunami that hit Asia in, I think, 1998. But then things developed. In 2019, Quad Plus, South Korea, New Zealand, and Vietnam came in. And they discussed cooperation on trade, technology, and supply chains. They were prescient because COVID, nobody knew about COVID yet. But they were concerned about China squeezing off the straits at Taiwan and endangering supply chain. 21 and 21, the summit spirit of the Quad statement said, to strive for a region that is free, open, inclusive, healthy, anchored by democratic values and unconstrained by coercion, and to facilitate collaboration, including in maritime security, to meet challenges to the rules-based maritime order in the East and South China Seas. And then in 2021, the Trilateral Security Partnership, AUKUS, USA, Australia, United Kingdom. They signed a security cooperation measure. They would exchange technology and so on for bombers, missiles, cyber capabilities, artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, and undersea capabilities. In 2021, Japan doubles their defense spending and commits to defending Taiwan. The US sends government reps to Taiwan and comes closer to moving away from the ambiguity regarding the defense of Taiwan. You remember when Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan? There she is in the middle. In 2022, the USA Pacific Deterrence Initiative, PDI. The Department of Defense invests over $66 billion in the Indo-Pacific region for financial year 2022, including what is highlighted in the PDI. And this is what it says the purpose is: to demonstrate commitment to preserving a free and open Indo-Pacific. The department is focused on maintaining and extending our military advantages in the region and is prioritizing the People's Republic of China as our pacing challenge while deterring and countering the destabilizing actions of North Korea. Second, to provide forces that are resilient, ready, and postured to respond quickly and effectively against the aggression, including in the Indo-Pacific. Maintaining our military effectiveness is a critical element of deterring aggression and preventing conflict. To help develop our alliances and partnerships in the Indo-Pacific, advancing the U.S. vision for a free and open, rules-based Indo-Pacific order, and enabling collective responses to common challenges that undermine security and stability. And then the Chinese, US, European, and Japanese economies, supply chains, and so on are tightly integrated. Can China afford to antagonize its best customers or lose the enormous loans and investment it has abroad? So that's food for thought in Beijing. Rather than fracturing the NATO and EU alliances, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has resulted in their unprecedented unity, in their alarmed rearmament, and in their determination to end their dependency on Russia for gas, oil, and so on. One would think the Chinese are asking themselves, would a similar thing happen in Southeast Asia if China were to provide Russia with weapons for the Ukraine war, and especially if it were to invade Taiwan? And meanwhile, of course, China continues its harassment of Taiwan, as we said last week. China's loud demands for non-interference in the internal affairs of a sovereign country, for example, Tibet, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, have been exposed as blatantly hypocritical by most of the world because of its support for Russian aggression in Ukraine. Russia's miscalculation of being welcomed as liberators, but being vigorously opposed by Ukraine's people, is sobering. Could the same thing happen in Taiwan, for example? Russia's military miscalculation of thinking it could easily overrun a weaker country's opposition with an enormous military attack and hijack its government under false flag or other pretenses is sobering. Could the same thing happen in Taiwan? So is China really the great dragon of the future that we fear? Well, in my view, there are 8 crises in China's future. Can you guess what that one is? Faces a demographic crisis. The population of mainland China was 1.412 billion people at the end of 2023, a decrease of 850,000 over the previous year, the 6th straight year that the number has fallen. The United Nations forecasts China's population will fall below 800 million by the year 2100. By 2035, 400 million people in China are expected to be over 60 and retired, accounting for nearly a third of its population. The working population in China grew by just 2.8% over the last 5 years, a significant contraction from a growth rate of 11.8% recorded in 2018. In 2018, there was an estimated 34 million more males in China than females, the result of a one-child policy that led couples to abort girls at a higher rate than boys. These males are referred to as bare branches because there are not enough girls to marry. As China's population grows older and older, pathogens like COVID or even common diseases like influenza could have a disastrous effect. In May 2021, the CCP unveiled plans to boost flagging birth rates by raising the official limit of 2 children per couple to 3. It is also now offering free fertility treatment under its national insurance scheme and a further range of incentives to couples and small families that encourage them to have children, including cash handouts, tax cuts, and even property concessions. Can you imagine that from 40 years ago? It's much easier in my view, much easier for an autocracy to prohibit people from having more children than to decree they should have more children. And they're finding that out. In a 2023 survey, nearly 40% of women with jobs said they preferred having just one child, while only 1.7% said they would like to have at least 3 children. 17% said they wanted 2 children, but nearly 20% of all respondents said they had no plans to have a child. 40% of unmarried women stated that they plan to get married after the age of 30 or not get married at all. Among the married women in the survey, more of them regretted getting married compared with men. We won't ask for a raise of hands here if that's true. The first survey also indicated that being overworked both at home and in the office prompted career women to reconsider having children. 50% of the women surveyed stated that they would rather redirect their energy toward furthering their careers than spending time taking care of children. Young people have embraced a lifestyle known as double income, no kids. Children are considered too expensive. Many younger adults also face the expense of taking care of aging parents and grandparents. So the new trend among China's young people is called the Bailan, or Let It Rot movement, which reflects a growing disillusionment with the pressures of work and societal expectations. This movement is closely related to the Dangbing, or lying flat trend, which emphasizes a minimalist lifestyle and a rejection of excessive ambition and relentless work culture. Both movements highlight the desire for personal autonomy and freedom from the demanding work culture prevalent in China. I took this picture on a street in Nanjing. I think he knew it. The population decline is also being exacerbated by increasing numbers of people leaving the country. By 2020, 10.5 million Chinese citizens were living abroad, and the rate of departures has continued to increase year by year. In 2024, 15,200 millionaires and 45 billionaires left China, taking over 50 billion with them. This is actually at the southern border of the United States. Did you know in the last 3 years, Chinese illegal immigrants have increased, a huge percent. And we actually knew people who knew people and showed us pictures of them when we were in Bangkok, people who had made it through and into the U.S. illegally. Secondly, China faces a food crisis. When real estate was booming at the turn of the century, land became a resource for profit, and less of it was used in the agricultural sector. Without enough land for growing food, the matter of feeding its huge population became irresolvable for China. At first, it managed by simply importing food from other countries, but the problems kept snowballing. For example, China depends heavily on wheat, sunflower oils, fertilizers, maize, barley, and other food products from Ukraine and Russia for both consumption and food production, which tells you a little bit of why they're cozying up to Russia these days. With the eruption of the Russo-Ukraine war, that has now become more problematical. Third, China faces a debt crisis. With problems constantly emerging and property constantly depreciating, the debt situation already appears to be in a state of crisis, and it seems that it will only get worse in the future. Under such circumstances, other countries can resort to financial macro control capabilities, such as raising interest rates, but it would be hard for China to do that. 4, China faces a geopolitical crisis. For a long time, China seemed to believe that its rise had nothing to do with global geopolitics, and that what it had achieved had depended entirely on the hardworking Chinese themselves. China also believed that it could get away with an aggressive expansionist policy and a hard-nosed wolf warrior diplomacy. China's recent, more aggressive stance has resulted in the rise of an increasingly negative attitude towards China by people of other countries. Australia, 82%, Japan, 87%, Sweden, 83%, US, 82%, South Korea, 80%, Canada, 74%, Netherlands, 75%, UK, 69%, and so on. And you can see by this chart, the yellow has to do with unfavorable opinion. 5, China faces an economic crisis. China's economic growth in 2022 slumped to one of its worst levels in nearly half a century, as the fourth quarter was hit by zero COVID curbs and a property market slump. For example, US $43 billion was spent by local governments on dealing with and enforcing the zero COVID policy. Can you imagine? $43 billion. For China's domestic economy, the drop in overseas demand reveals a more widespread employment problem, lack of high-skilled factory workers. Much of China's exports are comprised of foreign-produced components delivered for final assembly in China. And a lot of people, even economists, you don't hear them say this. You know, components are made all over the world, and then they're shipped to China, and it's assembled there. Well, what happens then? If the value of these imported components is subtracted from China's exports, the U.S. trade deficit with China is reduced by half to about 1% of GDP. The number of China's loss-making industrial enterprises has grown exponentially. So here you can see all the way up to from 2011 to 2024. And that's about 100, and on the right, about 150,000 enterprises that are losing money. China has been a major player in globalization and has been the biggest beneficiary of it, but Beijing has neither the ability nor the willingness to do more to maintain the globalization process that it comes under increasing pressure. China's ambiguous attitude towards such major events as the war in Ukraine and its zero COVID policy interrupted supply chains, seriously shattered globalization, and further boosted deglobalization. This has now been exacerbated, of course, by Trump's trade war. So the top 10 global risks in 2024, you see at the bottom, 25% is disrupted supply chains. Of course, the extreme weather is the major concern. China's property market has been hit by the biggest downturn since the emergence of the private sector in the 1990s. That would be under Deng Xiaoping. Sales have slumped by more than a third compared to their peak in the spring of 2021. House prices have been falling for years. Values have so far fallen by 3.5% and are likely to be down 6% from peak at the worst point. You've all heard of China's ghost cities, right? These were all built by local governments, speculating on future housing prices, that China's population would continue to expand and they would be able to sell it. Demand for housing between 25 and 2030 will be half what it was in the 5 years before the pandemic. Developers have been building more and more houses, but now the population has peaked and urbanization has slowed to a crawl. A fifth of China's economy is tied to the property and construction industry. A lot of developers won't exist in 5 years' time, they project. 60% of household wealth is in property. This is a big one. These are ordinary people. And the housing downturn, therefore, has massive repercussions for their wealth and their spending. Local governments have huge amounts of borrowed money tied up in construction speculation, as we said. The debt across all Chinese local government financing vehicles has doubled in 5 years to US $7 trillion. And here you see local government debt. Rapidly rising factory wages and a rising currency. You know, now people are saying Africa will be the shop floor of the future. And that's why China is focusing on and developing a lot of projects in Africa. And we could go into that. They're not succeeding very well. But so part of the reason is because wages in China are rising. Rapidly rising factory rates and a rising currency make Chinese workers relatively less cost competitive than their American counterparts. US factories are still 90% more productive than Chinese manufacturers. These trends and the trade war may lead to some reshoring or retention of manufacturing jobs in the United States. Pacifying a generation faced with near record youth unemployment and some of the slowest economic growth in nearly half a century presents the CCP with a serious dilemma. Improving young people's livelihoods without abandoning the country's export-led growth model poses inherent conflicts for a government that prioritizes social stability. 6, China faces an urbanization crisis. China's economic crisis is just a superficial reflection of the more deep-seated crisis of urbanization. Urbanization, after driving the Chinese economy's golden decade, can also lead to a decade or more of economic stagnation. Urbanization always requires a large amount of land for real estate. When real estate is thriving, it will destroy other industries and create an economic crisis. China is a country with an extreme dichotomy between urban and rural areas. Before urbanization, the urban population was less than 100 million, and the remaining nearly 700 million lived in rural areas. Now, China's population has reached 1.4 billion, with over 880 million living in cities. So compare that. Considering all the crises related to China's economy and society, many of them are self-inflicted because the root cause is the abnormal development of China's urbanization. 7, China faces a political crisis. Xi Jinping, like the emperors of old and the more recent emperors like Mao Zedong and other paramount leaders, seems invincible. However, with the nationwide demonstrations against his zero COVID policy in December of 2020, I think, he was forced to back down. Then, right after that, a number of signature C policies were immediately reversed, like policies on loans concerning stalled property projects, policies on tech companies, and policies concerning private companies reflecting what may well be the beginning of a new power struggle at the top. Maybe he isn't so invincible after all. I just read several articles on this yesterday and the day before, where there's a lot of speculation that there's a lot of tension in the leadership, and there may be a struggle for leadership. China faces a Taiwan crisis. It's painted itself into a corner by declaring that it will eventually retake the island at all costs, which has pushed Japan, Australia, Great Britain, New Zealand, USA to dramatically increase their support for the free and democratic island nation. And we went over that 2 weeks ago. So what are the choices for China and the United States in their relationship in the future? Well, the first one is catastrophe. If there's an all-out war, there's going to be World War III, and there's going to be atomic weapons, and there's going to be disaster. Do we want to do that? Second is conflict. Well, there may be a more limited war under certain aspects if China tries to retake Taiwan, for example. Is that what we want with all of the risks that there are in the world today? We could go back to what we called the Cold War with Russia, remember? We eventually ended up working out with them, well, we'll just coexist. We're not friends, but we're not going to fight, that kind of thing. And then we could get to a point where, okay, we have competition. Hopefully everybody's going to obey the rules about competition. That's been part of the problem, that China has not been obeying some of the rules of international commerce and so on. And wouldn't it be nice if we could get to a point where we would have cooperation? That we would say, okay, we're both strong nations with a long, with history and culture and all the rest. And we appreciate each other. We want to work together. We want to make the world a better place. And like for the climate change problems and all the rest, we're going to cooperate and work together. That would be my vote. Well, okay, we've kind of battered China, haven't we? So what about us? Are we part of the problem in this relationship? America's weaknesses, this is my view, that help to magnify our fears about China and the rest of the world, sap our material and spiritual resources, and hand China a propaganda windfall. As Xi Jinping looks over here at what's going on, and he says to his people, "That what you want?" By the way, chaos is the biggest enemy of any Chinese government and of the Chinese people. They fear, because China is just like Russia, made up of all kinds of different types of people, and has had a history of different kingdoms fighting each other and everything. And if China ever got into trouble and fell apart, the Lord help the world, because there would be chaos, not only in China, but in the world. So that's part of the reason they give for having a strong top leadership. So what about us? Economically, we have spent our future. We all have grandchildren, some of us great-grandchildren. They're going to pay for what we've been doing. The US dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1971. Our current national debt is 36 trillion, and now we just learned last week it's going to go up by another 3 to 7 trillion. On a per capita basis, it equates to roughly $115,000 per citizen. So I have 4 children, and wife and that's 6. So I would have to pay almost $700,000 on my share of this thing. We owe Japan 1.1 trillion, China 749 billion, the UK 690 billion, Luxembourg, get that, 373.5 billion, Canada 328.7. And now we're insulting people we owe this kind of money to. Our gross federal debt right now is, you can see, that's 2025, and it's going to go up. Secondly, demographically, we have an aging population and a low birth rate. We got the same problems that China did. 2020 saw the fewest babies born relative to the population of women between 15 and 44 of any year in American history. A recent Pew poll found that the fraction of non-parents between 18 and 49 saying they were very likely to have kids fell from 32% in 2018 to 26% this year, while the fraction saying they were not too likely or not at all likely increased from 37% to 44%. Diplomatically, we're playing catch up to China. In Africa, the South Pacific, Latin America, and they had the whole Belt and Road Initiative. It's got a lot of problems and so on, but they're out there, and we're playing catch up in some respects. Politically, we are in chaos. Can you imagine the propaganda value of that photo in China? And now all of the people are getting out of jail who were there. Structurally, we are rusting out. Developmentally, we are behind. In 2013, that's how many years ago already? Let's see, 7 and 5 is 12. I went to visit seminaries and churches and taught and preached in 11 cities in China, all by high-speed rail. And to get from like Shanghai to Beijing costs $35 US on a moving, what do I say, living room with a restaurant and everything. We're still arguing about building the first one in this country. AI, well, you remember about a month ago, the world was shocked when China revealed DeepSeek, which is way ahead of what we thought they were and ahead of us. Militarily, we are in a new arms race. The Lord help us. When you think of all the world's problems and struggles, and that we're spending, not only us, but of course Russia and France and I knows who now, billions and trillions on armaments to kill each other while people are dying of starvation and so on, living on the street. It's just horrible. But we're now in a new arms race. Let's face it. China increased its 2023 military budget by 7.5% to $224 billion. The U.S. increased our military budget to $816.7 billion. We're getting close to $1 trillion now. Well, and every one of these things, each one of them costs, land knows how much money, just one if you shoot it down. Environmentally, we're drowning in waste and pollution and acting as though climate change is a hoax, at least for some people. Before we were shipping our crap through China and other countries. Now they're saying no more. We're not taking any more of your stuff. Latin American countries. So, and I just, Grand Rapids, I heard, does not recycle anymore. I just heard that Holland is not going to recycle. Didn't you tell me that, Kathy? Somebody told me that Holland, do you remember that, huh? Holland is not going to recycle. And like in our community in Florida, we were recycling everything at Penny Farms. And we're only 550 people, but a significant amount of material. We now cannot recycle anymore because it costs so much for people who pick it up and so on that it's beyond payment. Well, I'm saying, to heck with it. Let's all of us 25 people pay a tax and do it. But maybe it'll come up for a vote in Holland, I don't know. Socially, we are being imprisoned by gun violence and terrorism and isolated by technology and social media. I love to talk to checkout clerks at stores. I hate those machines. Mass shootings in the past month. The Lord help us. And take a look at this. Isn't this more or less what's happening? Culturally, we laud the profane and mock the uplifting. Ethically, we are slaves to the bottom line. Morally, we are sinking into the abyss. Spiritually, we are abandoning the faith. Well, I'm out of time, so I'm not going to preach, but what can we do? Repent. That's an outdated word. Believe, revive, share, speak. Some of us just stop there. Act, save, repair, and recycle. Well, lest we end on a negative note, Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "It's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness." That's our hope today, that each of us can do our part where we are with what we have. And don't give in to the darker part of our nature. Okay, thank you. And now I think we have questions and so on.
Just to ask you a question, because this is an incident that I got involved with in 2012 and 2013. I was working in Taiwan, and with my boss, we were talking about the fact that in China, the subject came up of Post-it notes. Does everybody know what a Post-it note is in the room? And she said that'll would never happen in China because Post-it notes were caused by a mistake that a man did up at 3M, and suddenly everybody liked the idea. And we know, she said, all the management in China was not Chinese. Now, whether she's right or not, but a large percentage were Taiwanese managing from Taipei. I was in Kaohsiung, but managing. What's your comments on that? That they can do engineering things, they can do rudiment things up and down like this with the phone, but the minute they try to teach them like this, they can't move and be creative.
Well, I think that we're learning, they're learning how to do that much more. I mean, take a look at AI development, for example. But Post-it notes, that also is a culture where everything is controlled. Post-it notes are not controllable. And you're in trouble if you post something on the wall, especially in protest to anything. So I don't know. I'm sure they use Post-it notes in China. I don't know. I've been there, man knows how many times since 1976. But I don't know that I've ever seen Post-it notes. I don't know. I have no idea. But in terms of creativity, yeah, authoritarian regimes are not good for creativity. But I think they've seen that in economic affairs, that they have to allow a certain amount of flexibility and freedom in their. They are graduating more people in science and technology from their universities than we are. So I think they're ahead of us in some ways.
I want to thank you for an extremely comprehensive, well-prepared, cautious, and also counterbalancing presentation. I think everyone in America ought to hear this presentation you just gave. It's amazing. But I have two observations. The first one, can you return to slide 8, please, or point 8, that is part of the CCP goals? It's the one with the police wearing the glasses. It's between 8 and 9 goals.
The crisis, the goals.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can find it.
You passed it up. Go forward. It's one right after 8, and it shows the police wearing glasses.
There.
One more slide,
Oh,
please.
yeah, sorry.
Now, yesterday, I don't know how many people are aware of this. You went to T-Mobile yesterday, and what they're doing is not adjusting the sunglasses to see how the sun looks. My wife and I saw at T-Mobile, that's taking a picture. Those are cameras that they can photograph. Yeah. And my wife was listening in the stems of those sunglasses to music and adjusting the music by sliding her hand. It'll do videos, it'll do translations, it'll do all sorts of things.
That's what they're doing.
Right, I know, there. And that's public monitoring. And we're shocked to see that. But when I talked to a friend about it, oh, yeah, it's been out. We knew about that.
And they have cameras all over the place. They had a big campaign to become model citizens. So, if you jaywalked or something, it was on camera and then you got a fine. But at the same time, on the other side, it's watching what everybody does every day of their lives all over the country. Yeah.
The other one is an observation. When you talked about military buildup for China and you talked about their strategic alliances, what's going on, and you talked about declining population. What occurs to me is a question of timing for military aggression. They're going to have, while they build up and with capabilities and while they create these alliances with others, and then the decline of the factors you present, to me, that's just a blatant obvious. Let's pick the timing when aggression is going to happen.
Right, and people have guesstimated that Xi Jinping may launch an assault on Taiwan in 2027 because the window of opportunity will get smaller in the future. And just like with Putin, I mean, now he has succeeded in surrounding himself with NATO, which is rearming and will be, you know, he'll be in a much worse position than he was before. So that's, I think, and then this three-front war, I think if Xi Jinping, they're calculating, you know, that they're gradually going to lose the ability to militarily take Taiwan. Yeah, sorry, he was. Well, she's got the mic, then we'll go back.
It talks about the zero COVID policy.
Yeah.
Are they quarantining people?
Yeah,
What's
yes,
the big-
everybody was quarantined, the whole country. Could not go out of their houses or their apartments. So they delivered food on the streets and all of that during the COVID crisis. But of course, it took a terrible toll economically and socially. You know, we have problems here because of
Mhm.
COVID, especially our children. Well, can you imagine if we had shut everybody up in their house for what, 2 years? What's that?
Is that still happening though?
No, no,
No,
no.
you're just treating it as a
Yeah.
historical.
Yes. That was a part of the reason they're having some of these problems now. Yeah.
Comment about the surveillance culture, the police with the photographic glasses. I remember in my conversation with some Chinese friends in the 1980s here, and there is a Chinese maxim that says, whatever you do, 10,000 eyes watching you.
Yeah.
And so that notion that you have to behave because you're being observed is an old one. It's not something new, but the surveillance thing, and of course that spread over here as well. What does the three self movements? What are the three of those three selves? Remind me of those again.
Self-government,
Self-government,
self-propagation,
propagation.
and self-support. But it has been, you might say, the conduit between the China Christian Council, which came into existence in the 80s, and the Religious Affairs Department of the government. So if the church had a problem, they could go through that to the government. If the government had a problem, they could go through that to the church. It was like a negotiating.
And what does self-propagation mean?
Evangelism, that kind of thing.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Actually, the Reformed Church in America and our mission in Amoy was the first body to do that in China. We were ecumenically working together with the English Presbyterians and the London Missionary Society, and our goal was to contextualize the faith, create indigenous leadership as quickly as we could, and have the churches become self-supporting as fast as they could. So people don't, you know, we were a small mission in terms of the entire China, so people don't historically acknowledge that, but that is the case.
Now, this is just an observation rhetorically, I think, but as a minister and with scripture prophetically, with eschatology, it would be fascinating with your background to look at Daniel, Ezekiel, and Revelation, the context of this as an overarching picture with convergence of world events right now. And that's probably rhetorical because that opens a gigantic area of question.
Well, John Calvin never wrote a commentary on one book, which was that. So that's where I am too.
Hi, you had the phrase, the Sinicization, Chinese making of the church. Would you describe what that?
Yeah, I had said that there were a number of things from working through Christian theology to look for ways in which it can connect to and support the CCP ideology, Marxist ideology. Like, for example, in Acts, when all the believers, contributed what was needed and what they had excess of, that would be an example. But also then to retranslate the Bible through that kind of a lens, which is pretty dangerous because eventually at the bottom of Marxism was atheism, right? So how are you going to reconcile that? And those kinds of things. There have been conferences on that theme, both in China and in Hong Kong. And what it does is you really should say it's the communization of Christianity. Yeah.
Wendell, what is China's current policy on graduate students studying in the United States? One of the reasons I ask that is that there's been a very, very significant loss on the United States part. I'll use the term theft on China's part of intellectual property.
Yeah.
So,
well, from China's point of view, when Deng Xiaoping came to power and opened up China to the West, the first ideas of foreign investment and moving towards a capitalistic economy with stock markets and all the rest, they saw the United States as of course, the key and foremost power in the world that was developing all kinds of things. And so they wanted to send their young people here so that they could learn and there was a very positive, our relationship with China, if you look at it historically, is love-hate. I mean, there's a period when we have wonderful relationships, and then you get to the next period and it sours and it's bad. Then again, you have a good relationship and so on, if you look back. All the way to Polk, James Polk was the president who had the manifest destiny doctrine that we were destined to own everything between here and between the two oceans, partly because he wanted to open up a trade route to Asia and to China. Ever since then, so under the present circumstances, of course, now it's becoming difficult because our current I was going to say regime, excuse me, our current administration, of course, has created a tremendous problem for international students. Plus, under Xi Jinping, they become more wary about people going abroad, students going abroad, and they've developed a lot of ways of monitoring who does what and what they do, even in our country. So I would say they're cautious now, but I remember talking to young people in China decades ago, and of course they were all wanting to practice a little English and so on. And what impressed them was that America is ahead in science and they're a Christian country, so there must be a link. Yeah. There must be a link. And that motivated a lot of young people to become Christians in China.
My husband and I taught a semester in China in 2005, and it was at a university in Fuzhou, and Fuzhou had had missionaries there from the RCA. I think the last name was Van Wyck.
Oh yeah, Gordon Van Wyck.
Yeah, Gordon Van Wyck.
Yeah.
And there were probably still some very old people in Fuzhou that remembered some of that. And this university, it was an agriculture and forestry university. It was pretty much secular, but I was asked to teach teachers there of English. And among those teachers, there were some Christians, and one that offered almost like a Bible study every Friday night in her apartment on campus. And I went to several of those, and she taught it in English. Students there almost associated English with Christianity.
Yeah.
And it also, they associated it with Amway.
Yeah.
Amway had a big building
Yeah, they did.
in Fuzhou.
Yeah.
Capitalism. So they were looking at my teaching style to see that, oh yeah, she's not just teaching rote, where you memorize things and spit them back. It was more about opening minds and asking questions and discussion. And they liked that. When I taught, I was able to taught these teachers, I was able to create my own curriculum. And so I came there with a booklet, probably 100 pages of selections from the best of what I consider of Western literature, and started out with creation stories from Genesis. And they immediately said, well, we have two creation stories. And so I said, let's talk about those too. And so that was part of it. And I included some parables, and I don't even know, I don't remember all the things that I included, but they were strongly Christian, and I was not ever hampered from that. And that was a time, I think, when we had good relations with China. When would you say that China and America had the best relationship? Was it during the time of Nixon, shortly after his visit?
No, that was just the beginning of unfreezing the relationship. Deng Xiaoping, during that era, he opened China up to the West, and that was in the 80s. And he came here for a visit. Remember, there was an iconic photograph of him with a cowboy hat on. He was a very diminutive man in stature, but just very outgoing kind of person, and enjoyed his visit tremendously and so on. And that really launched a warm relationship at that time.
When Judy was speaking, I thought of the student that you had in the THM program at Western some years ago. And she was a teacher, and she said in their universities then, so this would have been early 2000, she could teach the Bible. And we looked at her and said, you couldn't do that in a public university here. The other thing I would like to comment on, Wendell.
Hangzhou, she taught at the University of Hangzhou. She used the Bible as part of, Western literature.
The other comment that was very striking that I'd like to make, a thing that was very striking to me in 2023 when we were in Bangkok with these families who were coming out so that their kids could have Christian education. But the desire of these Chinese Christians to go back or train their children to go back. Wendell's alluded to the changes in China, open, closed. And it was so neat to hear these Chinese saying, whether it's we or our children, we want to go back when we can, so that the Christian faith goes on. And that to me is encouraging. I mean, that's outside of the political situation, but looking at some China.
The unregistered churches now are surviving by splitting up into small groups and constantly changing venues. So instead of being one larger church meeting in a certain place, they're meeting in small groups, and they're changing the venues all the time. And that does help some, but it's very difficult. Sorry, there's
I was just wondering, what is the status of the regular accepted churches? When I was
the
there,
registered churches, the China
registered,
Christian
because when I
Council?
was there in 2015, they were very open.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't allow children, but the service was just like a regular Reformed church service
Yeah.
with the Heidelberg Catechism. And so I'm just wondering, how is it today?
Well, yeah, it's the way I described in the lecture. There are all kinds of restrictions, and there are all kinds of political influencing going on. And Bishop K.H. Ding, who I said was the head of the Protestant church in China for 60 years, and went through various periods in his life in relationship to communism and the government and all that. He said one time to me in, I guess that was about 90, yeah. He said, you know, we can't be like you are in the United States. We can't go out on the streets and have a demonstration, or we can't oppose the government and this and that openly. He said, but we also, that's one thing. He said, the other thing is we cannot give up the essentials of the Christian faith. So we have to learn how to walk the narrow line between acquiescing to this in order to maintain that. And that's a very difficult thing. And that's what's going on today. Yeah. But then you have some, of course, in the Christian church, like Y.T. Wu was he was supportive of the whole of the Chinese Revolution and thought Marxism was the future for Christians in China. He was the mentor for K.H. Ding. And he had, in essence, rejected the essentials of the Christian faith. So, but K.H. Ding came back and he said, we have to do the middle way, which is Chinese.
Yeah, is there any new information on what's happening with the Uyghurs? I mean,
Uyghurs.
does it just continue as it has been?
As far as I know, that the thing is, we had a big dust up about it and then it's disappeared from the news. So who knows? But as far as I know, there's been no change in China. Yeah.
You mentioned how so many people are leaving the country. Is there some way that China can control that at all?
They're moving in that direction. It's getting harder to go out and to leave. Yeah. But, you know, like the people we worked with in Bangkok, Thailand has very good relations with the Chinese government. It's right near China and very easy to go to. You can go as a tourist. Well, how are they going to, if they cut off tourism for their people going elsewhere, it'll affect tourism into China. So it's fairly easy to go to someplace like Thailand and then just stay there. You overstay, but you just pay a fine.
But the back and forth for Chinese between Thailand and China, or even the US and China, can be difficult. The school that we worked at had a summer camp that summer before we came, and families from China came with their children. And that particular year, each family that came and returned to China was visited by the Chinese police and asked, oh, where were you? And they knew. We also had people from the school who went back to their families, and some had their cell phones confiscated. And so they had to be very careful with what they brought back. The other was the administrator of the school actually had left China some years ago. His mom died. He is a
Well, he
US.
left China because he had to.
Well, why don't you explain about him and what happened? And there was no way he should go back.
Well, right, and his mother died, and you know, for Chinese, he's the oldest son, and his mother dies, and he's supposed to be there, obviously. So he really wrestled with it. He and I had several sessions about it, and finally, he had a son here in a university in California who called him and said, Dad, if you go back, you know you're going to prison, and I'll fly over and partly keep you from doing. But so what we did is we had a service for his mother's funeral in our little church that we helped to start. And then it was Zoom to his son and other people.
This is only tangentially related to your presentation, but you've piqued my curiosity now that Judy mentioned Gordon and Bertha Van Wyck.
Yeah.
Who were the RCA missionaries, if you recall, or maybe Aunt Joyce, you can help me too, who were expelled from China when Mao Zedong came to power? Do you remember? I know Van Wyck's were, but I'm not sure.
Joe and Esther, well, there were Wally and Harriet de Belder. Joe and Esther, they went to the Philippines. Joanne, yeah, the Vain Scotens. they, and then Gene Walvard, who went to Taiwan, John Meilenberg in Virginia, they, where did they go? I can't remember. And the last one was 51. He was a doctor. I'm trying to remember his name. He was the last one to be expelled. Yeah.
Just ask that because as an RCA pastor, you know, as small of a denomination as we are, it had a very significant impact in global missions. So
We sent first American missionaries to India, to China, to Japan, to Indonesia, well, the Dutch East Indies, to the Middle East, and to Korea. We didn't really send one to Korea, but he was a graduate of New Brunswick Seminary, had a heart for Korea. There were no Roman Catholics had been there for 100 years, but so he applied to the RCA. The RCA, we don't have enough money to send you. Why don't you try the Presbyterians? So he did, and they sent him to Korea, and he became one of the most productive missionaries in history. Underwood, Horace Underwood. And he founded the Yonsei University in Seoul, and his son succeeded him. It was kind of like the Scudders in India. I went to the cemetery in India and counted all the years of service of all the Scudders buried there, over 1,000 years. And then okay.
Underwood's picture was on a postage stamp some time along the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so he's RCA, but he was sent by the Presbyterians.
well, thank you, Wendell, and thanks for permitting some of us to wax nostalgic, I guess. But next week we are on for Indonesia. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Oh, I
so-
should say that if last week I forgot to say there is a book available on Hong Kong and my involvement in the history and culture and all that. And then there are 2 books available, not today, but if you're interested, The Church Under the Cross, Mission in Asia in Times of Turmoil, The Cross of Communism. This is China. Yeah, history and everything. And this is the one about Bishop K.H. Ding that I mentioned. He went through a number of different periods in his life, which is quite interesting.
So we will send a link following next week where you can be in contact with Wendell if you choose to purchase any of his books. Okay. All right. Have a great week. We will see you a week from today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Invite you and your wife to lunch
Oh.
next week after class. There's a lot more I